The next season of Marvel Snap is all about Quantumania, the upcoming Ant-Man film, and while we don't know the exact cards that will be coming to the game during Quantumania, we can make some pretty good educated guesses based on the unreleased cards on the collection screen right now. I'm fairly certain not all of these cards are going to be coming during February, but the cards that come out in February will be some combination of the following cards: Stature, Ghost, Kang, Modoc, Nimrod, and the Living Tribunal. Each of these cards are freaking insane, so let's talk about them. Stature is Cassie Lang, so I'll be a little bit shocked if she doesn't end up being added during Quantumania because she's in that movie, so it would just make sense. She's a 5/7, which is actually pretty solid stats with the effect costs 1 if your opponent has discarded a card this game. It's kind of like a Miles Morales, but for if the opponent has discarded a card. To be clear though, the effect is actually significantly stronger than Miles's because it's checking for if the opponent has discarded a card this game rather than if they've discarded one the prior turn. So as long as they have discarded a card at some point, she will always be a 1/7, and she's a 1/7 instead of a 1/5. So she's got a lot going for her that Miles doesn't have. The only problem with this card is that there's not very many activations in Marvel Snap for forcing your opponent to discard a card. The only two that we have right now are Moon Knight and Black Bolt, neither of which see a ton of play right now. One of which actually has a chance of discarding Stature, and that's actually the more playable of the two cards. Moon Knight obviously discards a card from your hand, so if that card ends up being Stature, that's really, really unfortunate for your game plan. There's probably some discard hybrid list that wants to run, you know, Moon Knight, Swarm, Colleen Wing, Black Bolt, and Stature, which could actually be a pretty decent list. Regardless of how strong that archetype ends up being, this is a really fun card that sadly I'm probably going to have to pass on. I'm not going to purchase this card with tokens just because of how many other crazy options we have this month. One of those crazy options is Ghost. Ghost is a 1/2 with the effect ongoing. Your cards always reveal first. This is a very scary effect to add to Marvel Snap. I think the viability of this card comes down to how it actually functions. It's possible that the card actually flips priority mid-turn. We haven't seen an effect like this, so we don't know if that's actually something that's possible to do in Marvel Snap, but there's a chance that even if you have priority, meaning your cards would flip first, you would be able to play Ghost, then your opponent's cards would flip, and then the rest of your cards would flip. Now, if the card does function like that, that opens up some incredible Ghost combos. Just to name an obvious one, you could play Ghost, then your opponent's cards would flip, then you could play Shang-Chi, destroying the cards that your opponent played that turn. It's also possible that the card doesn't swap priority during mid-turn, meaning you'd have to set up Ghost earlier in the game. This distinction is incredibly important though. If Ghost can swap priority mid-turn, she becomes a super important card, especially for Galactus players who probably just end up cutting Cosmo in favor of Ghost. If she can't swap priority mid-turn, honestly, I think she'll probably end up being a relatively niche card that doesn't see a ton of play, unless I'm missing something. But this is definitely an effect to keep an eye on regardless of whether she swaps mid-turn or not, because as Marvel Snap adds more cards, there'll be more interactions that favor Ghost. This one I'm super excited about, and it's Kang. Kang is a 5/0 with the effect on reveal. Look at what your opponent did and then restart the turn. So let's get some functionality clarification out of the way because it's pretty important. First of all, Mr. Negative is more or less pointless with this card. Kang's effect restarts the turn, so being able to play additional cards with Kang is, again, relatively pointless because those additional cards that you play will just return to your hand. Discounting Kang, on the other hand, does come with some additional bonus. It means you get to play him a little earlier in the game, but truth be told, it's probably best that we play Kang on turn 6 most of the time anyways. I'm about to make a handful of assumptions about how Kang works, but I think they're relatively safe assumptions. After Kang restarts the turn, you should draw the exact same card you drew the first time the turn started, unless that card was Kang, in which case I think you're just going to effectively draw the next card in your deck, effectively making Kang a draw 1, which is pretty exciting. The opponent will also know that you played Kang, so it gives them a little bit of information, but in theory, the Kang player always has more information than the non-Kang player. I think in theory, our best turn to play Kang is turn 6, but if we top deck Kang on turn 5, we might just want to go ahead and play Kang because, again, it is essentially just one card draw. What's the best home for Kang, you might be wondering? Well, I actually think it's going to be Galactus. He works really well both after and before playing Galactus. Before playing Galactus, he lets us know if the opponent's going to beat us with a tech card, say like a Spider-Man or a Professor X or a Cosmo or something like that. And then if we play Kang after having played Galactus, he tells us what combination of cards are going to be best against our opponent's best options. Now, our opponent can always change their options because Kang restarts the turn, meaning he's restarting the opponent's turn as well. So the opponent might see that you play Kang and then change their options, but they're going to lead with their best foot forward. So if they change their options to beat what they assume is going to be your response, then they're making their turn 6 quote unquote weaker than it would have been if you didn't play Kang. Most of that logic applies to only Galactus, because there's only one location to work with. It gets a little bit more complicated without Galactus, because if you play Kang and then the opponent modifies their turn, all they could do is simply change the location that they're adding power to, and all of a sudden your equation becomes a lot more complicated. But in just the one location Galactus game, the evaluation is significantly more in your favor than it would be otherwise. And of course, it's a nice inclusion in Galactus because, assuming I'm correct about the functionality and that he's sometimes a card drawer, it's pretty important that we run this card in Galactus, because sometimes Kang will just actually let us draw Galactus when we otherwise wouldn't be able to. All right, before I say this next part, please skip 30 seconds or so if you're worried about spoilers and leaks. I'm going to give you 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Our very next season pass card is Modoc. Modoc is a 5/8 with the effect on reveal, discard your hand. A super fun and powerful effect, and he has good stats. Modoc is definitely one to look out for. A lot of people's first thoughts are going to be Invisible Woman Hela decks. You play Invisible Woman, you play Modoc, and then you play Hela, and then you just profit. And that will probably be the meta for the first 24 hours of the new season, maybe even a little bit longer. But it might finally be time for some old decks to resurface. Now, for those who don't remember, during the early days of the beta, there was a really powerful deck that combined 2-cost Hellcow. Believe it or not, Hellcow used to be 2 energy. And we would run Collector, Swarm, Apocalypse, and Dracula all in the same deck, alongside Narkia, which was also buffed at the time, that had a different effect, and then Okoye. And we would run all of these cards together, and it would result in some really big, powerful units. And Modoc might bring back a similar archetype with some buff cards, again with Swarm, Apocalypse, and Dracula, just because he targets the whole hand. He says, get all of this out of my hand, and that's exactly what that deck wants to do anyway, at least on turn 5, setting up for a very powerful turn 6 with an Apocalypse and a Chavez. There's lots of really cool stuff to do with Modoc, and I'm super excited about him. He's definitely going to be a blast. Speaking of a blast, Tribunal is, well, the Living Tribunal is a 6/4 with the effect at the end of the game, split your total power evenly among all locations. I think this is probably the most exciting effect since Galactus was added to the game. It's going to take a lot of work to optimize a Living Tribunal deck, because Living Tribunal decks probably are going to look a lot different than, say, a traditional Marvel Snap deck. In a similar fashion to Galactus decks look very different to normal Marvel Snap decks. A lot of people's first thoughts are going to be, well, we probably want to run Iron Man, Mr. Negative, and Mystique, which is probably correct. We're probably going to be running all of those cards in a Living Tribunal deck, mainly because Mr. Negative also has positive interactions with the Living Tribunal, making him a 4-cost card. There is an important functionality question to ask about Living Tribunal, and we won't know the answer to this until we get Living Tribunal. I believe ongoing effects are going to apply both before and after Living Tribunal. So let's set up an example. Again, this is a strange example, but follow me for the functionality. Let's assume our location is Living Tribunal, Iron Fist, and Iron Man. So our total power at the location is 12, and then the game ends. If I understand the functionality of the card correctly, Living Tribunal should evenly divide the power at that location across all locations. It actually divides your total power, but in this example, we only have power at one location. So it'll divide our 12 total power across all locations, so it will be 4, 4, 4, but then Iron Man's ongoing is still going to apply. So I think the actual total power will be, or the actual final power once our game is over, will actually be 8, 4, 4. And if that's the case, ongoing effects are incredibly appealing for Living Tribunal decks. So we're probably going to run maybe even something like Devil Dinosaur. Claw is actually quite a bit of power for Living Tribunal because it's 10 divided across 3 locations, because the 4 from Claw's stats, 6 from his ongoing, and then another 6 after the end of game effect triggers, because again, the ongoing is still in play. Outside of like that ongoing package that we were just talking about, Living Tribunal could also be really effective in potential Hela decks, because we're not paying for Living Tribunal in that scenario, and it's a way for Hela to be quote-unquote more consistent. We should have a better idea of where our power's going if Living Tribunal's in the deck. Hela's currently restricted because when we play Hela, we don't know where our Infinite's going to land. We don't know where our big power cards are going to land, but Living Tribunal will just even all of that out and then split it across the locations. It's hard to tell if that's good or not until we play test with it, or until you run all of the really boring math, which I'm not going to do just right now. I'm immediately purchasing Living Tribunal given the option. It should be a very fun card, probably the card I'm most excited about next season, assuming he's actually coming next season, because we don't know for sure. The only contender to Living Tribunal is the final card we're going to talk about today, and that's Nimrod. Nimrod is a 5/5 with the effect when this card is destroyed, or when this is destroyed, add a copy to each other location. There are so many interesting synergies with this card. I cannot believe they're going to print this. This is going to be so much fun. Shout out to whatever designer made this. This card is crazy. I feel like I don't even need to go over the synergies because they should be pretty clear, because it's destroy packages, and if anybody's played with any deck in Marvel Snap, they probably come across destroy synergy at some point. But just to name some examples, what if we do Shuri, Nimrod, Zola? That's a lot of power right there. That's a 10 power Nimrod in middle, and then Zola is adding a copy to each side, each other side, and then Nimrod is also adding a copy to each other side. So we end up with 20 power in total using that 3-card combo. Pretty exciting stuff right there. There's more complicated combos, like we could do Mr. Negative on 4, Nimrod on 5, Zola, Venom, Null on turn 6, which ends up with a board state that looks like this. That's pretty awesome. Even something as simple as Nimrod on 5 on turn 6, Venom, Carnage is pretty good just on its own, and that's just cards that you would probably run in most Nimrod decks anyway without even having to make any deck concessions specifically for Nimrod. These are just cards that you would run. Something I actually just thought about while recording is you could actually pair Nimrod with Galactus. This would have to be like a turn 6 Galactus strategy as opposed to the turn 5 strategy, but the idea would be pretty straightforward. You would play Shuri into Nimrod into Galactus, and because the locations destroyed themselves from left to right, Nimrod would destroy himself. Nimrod would then summon on the Galactus location, and then the other available location, and then the next location would get destroyed, which also has a Nimrod on it, and then the Nimrod would summon in the final Galactus location. It's essentially like summoning 2 gigantic Wolverines at your final Galactus location, which is pretty much exactly what a turn 6 Galactus deck wanted. So turn 6 Galactus might be legit after Nimrod's release. Nimrod is a super exciting card, and I'm pretty certain this card's going to be some type of meta relevant. Definitely look out for Nimrod. Get your armors ready, get your Professor X's ready, because I'm sure you're going to need them. I want every single one of these cards coming to the game in February so badly. They each look incredible, maybe with the exception of Ghost, if her effect does not change priority mid-turn. That's something we're going to have to wait until February for. I'm super pumped about this season. I hope you are too. Let me know which one of the cards coming in February you are most excited about, and I'll see you then.